So in this tutorial, I'm going to be sharing with you some of my favorite stereo widening techniques, and I'm also going to be sharing some of my favorite plugins that I like to use for this task. And also bear in mind when watching this video that these plugins that I use, you don't necessarily need to use those. You can use Ableton stock plugins or Logic stock plugins or whichever ones you have to hand. And also it's worth noting that it'd be great if you could use a pair of headphones or some stereo speakers, obviously to hear the full effects of the processes that I'm about to show you. And after I've shown you some of my favorite techniques, we're going to be looking at the importance of mono compatibility. And I'd like to explain why mono compatibility is important and what effects it can have on your mixes if the stereo image is too wide, and in what kind of context that would affect your mix. But yeah, let's get stuck in. I'll show you the examples and some little tricks that you can do just to make things a little bit wider. So the first example, we're going to be looking at this mono bass, which is taken from a Sub 37 and it's in the Sub-Zero pack. So I'll let you have a quick listen to this. So it's a really lovely sound. It's very mono, but I would like to add some excitement in the stereo field. And one of my favorite ways to do this is to just use a chorus plugin. And one of my favorites is the Tal Chorus LX plugin. So if we open this up, and this is based on the Juno synth, the Roland Juno, and it's basically the chorus effect within the synth just put into plugin form. This is free to get from the Tal website, which is really good. And again, you can just use Ableton Chorus if that's what you want to do. And so normally people would kind of use this dry wet knob here, but because we're dealing with bass, I don't want to make the sub frequencies affected by the chorus. So there's a method that I like to use. So basically I'll switch this to wet, and then I will make sure that the stereo width is full wide, and I will group the plugin. So now the plugin is grouped, I will change this one to wet, and I will create another chain, and we will call that dry. And now we've got two different channels. So we've got the wet channel and we've got the dry channel. The wet channel is going to have the Tal Chorus plugin on, and the dry one, nothing. It's just going to be the full dry signal. The reason why I do this is because I then like to add in, where is it? There we go. An EQ, and this allows me to filter the high frequencies. So we're filtering out the low frequencies and just allowing the chorus effect to manipulate the higher frequencies to take out all that sub bass. I usually put it around 240 to 260. You don't need to do that. You can play around with it and try and find a nice happy medium of where you want it to sit. But I usually stick around here. And so now we've got two separate channels, one with the effect, one without. That one's filtered, so it's not affecting the bass and the sub bass regions. We can start to layer these together. So I'm just going to start bringing that up as it's playing. And this is before. And on again. So that's really lovely, but one thing that this does do is it sometimes makes the top end a bit brighter because you're actually just piling on more top end signal. So sometimes that might be a like you might like that and you might just keep it as it is, but you can just put in a low shelf. So if I could put this to 240 as well, and if we just bring that down like a dB or two, just to rebalance the signal. So that's my first trick that I like to use, especially on sub bass, but you can use it on anything. And then the next one is we've got the pseudo stereo effect. So we've just got like a simple keys loop here, which I'll play now. It's very dry again and very mono. So that's also taken from the Sub-Zero pack as well, which is the Sub-37 pack. And what we're going to use is, it was free at the time when I got it, but I don't know if it's free anymore. You'll have to go and find out. But it's the Ozone Imager. And this is like a pseudo stereo effect. If you use it too much, if you overcook it, it can really damage the overall mix processing. But what I tend to do is just use it subtly, and you can use this correlation meter on the right hand side to have a visual feedback of whether you're pushing it too far. So basically, if this little blue square here goes below 0, then you're overdoing it basically, and you kind of want it to sit anywhere between 0 and 1. The more it's towards +1, the more mono the signal is, and obviously -1, the wider it is. And I'm gonna play it, and we'll just start dialing this in. Click the stereo eyes button on, and also the stereo eyes button. You can, so as you can see, that it says change the character of the stereo effect, and I usually leave it at 6 because I kind of find that it's quite nice there. But with certain sounds, you can move it around and find a better sound with it. And yep, so let's go ahead and start dialing this in. Sorry, so as you can see, it's coming up on the vector scope as very, very mono, and you'll see that open up in a second. So with this sound, you could actually get away with going full width and just really spreading it out, but I would tend to just kind of notch that back a bit, maybe around 50. Quick A-beam. So I really love this plugin. It kind of adds a pseudo stereo effect without adding too many artifacts to the original sound, and you can get away with pushing it on quite a lot of channels as well. So that's a great little plugin to use. And then for the next one, I'm going to show you two very simple ones actually, which most of you will just be doing anyway. And the first one is to set up a delay send, because if you use like ping pong delay, or I'll show you in a second, I use repeater, which is from Slate, and the reason why I use this is because it's got this spread button here, and also I love the analog button, which allows you to create like a tape style delay effect, so the delay will be like slightly wobbling, so you get this like really nice analog warm kind of like sound. And then you've got the ping pong button as well. So what I'll do is I'll dial this in. In fact, first I'll show you the dry signal. Start to dial this in now. So at the minute it's quite mono, the delay signal. So what I'm going to do is, I've got two options that I like to use. Got the ping pong button, which means that it'll be ping ponging from left to right or right to left. And then we've got the stereo spread button, which is just a really cool little feature on this. I'll show you the ping pong first, which I tend to use quite a lot. And then stereo spread. So if you turn ping pong back off and you switch this button over, so that spread button's really cool if you you want the stereo spread of the delay, but you don't want that ping pong effect. So you kind of just want like the Ableton simple delay where it's coming out both speakers at the same time. You want that, but you want a kind of spread effect. And I'm pretty sure it's using another technique that I'm going to show you later, which is called the Has effect. I'm pretty sure that's what that's implementing there. So yeah, that's a really cool little trick that I use quite often. And the next one is very similar technique. So it's just using a reverb send. And again, I'm going to show you another Slate plugin, but you can just use Ableton's plugins. The reason why I use this one is because it's got two really cool little features. So we've got the chorus knob here, and then you've also got a width knob, which can make the reverb more mono, or you can push it out to the stereo field. And we're going to apply that to this loop here, also from the Sub-Zero pack. So it's a really nice little chord progression there, but because we've got the dry one, I want to make it wider and I want to give it more of like a lush pad sound. So we'll start dialing this in, and I've left the reverb quite high so you can really hear the effects taking place, but I would tend to balance it a little bit more and bring it down in the mix, but we'll dial it in now. So it's much wider, much lusher, and now I'm going to play around with the chorus knob and the width knob. When playing around with these, be careful not to overdo it, because then it'll just get lost when it switches back to mono compatibility, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, I'll play it and I'll dial these in. So yeah, lovely little technique there, and really, really nice reverb plugin. So this next technique is widely used, and it's something that is being talked about a lot on tutorial videos and in magazines, and it's called the Has effect. And it's something that I used to use quite a lot when I first started out, and I really loved the effect. But what I found was when switching back to mono, if you like go onto the master channel and you switch the mono on utility, you end up sometimes on short percussive sounds, you end up with this kind of like phasing effect or slapback effect, which I find quite undesirable. It's not something that I want on my mixes. But I'll take you through it. I'll show you how to do it, and let you listen to the effect. And then I'm going to show you a couple of ways that the things that I like to do to get a similar effect, but without the undesirable artifacts, which I'm also going to show you in a second too. So what you want to do to achieve this is, if you bring up a simple delay, just an Ableton stock plugin, and switch these to time, lower that one to 1 millisecond, and then for the right channel, I mean you can do it right to left if you want either as well. We're going to dial it into around 17.4. So the general kind of rule is that anything from like a couple of milliseconds to maybe like 25-30 milliseconds will create this pseudo stereo effect. And what it is you basically got the same sound, but it's been struck twice, once in the left channel, once in the right channel, but the right channel is slightly delayed, in this instance by 16.4 milliseconds. And make sure you've got dry wet end right up too. So yeah, I'll just go ahead, play it, and let you hear what that sounds like. In fact, I'll show the dry version first, and then I'll switch it on. So you can hear it just like instantly. If you're on speakers or headphones, it just pops out to the stereo field. But what I'm going to show you now is what happens when you switch it to mono. So yeah, you can hear that straight away. It's got like a kind of slapback flanging effect or phasing effect, which I don't particularly like. So I found out a couple of ways to get around this and still achieving the same effect. And one of them is simply just to pitch one of the signals. So you can do this subtly. You can use detune, or you can do what I've done here, which is like a full 3 semitone pitch down. And in this impulse, we've got one going to the right, which is just left at 0 semitones, and then the left signal, which panned there, and that's at -3. and I'll press play. The only thing I will say with this is that you are changing the tonality of the hat, which sometimes actually sounds better, but I'll play that for you now. And the original. I'll tell you what, it would help. I've got it switched off. But yeah, what I'll do is I'll switch back to mono now with that playing. So here we get the has effect, but we don't get that the slap back kind of effects that we had before with the original has effect technique. And there is actually another way to do this as well. So because we pitched it down, that's like the fast way to do it, but there's like a more creative way to do it, which is to find another sample which sounds like it could be a similar sound. So in this instance, I've found another hat which is a little bit similar. You can combine them, layer them, and it'll make like a nice new tonal hat. And what that does is that you can spread them both out left and right, but then when it's collapsed into mono, they just sit on top of each other. So in this example, we've got the original hat, and we also have this one. I'll play them together. So I think with that you can get a much more interesting sound. You're kind of layering it, stacking them to create a new sound, but you're also getting this like really wide stereo effects as well, which is really nice. And yeah, so those kind of 6-7 examples are my favorite techniques that I like to use, and some of my favorite plugins. What we're going to go through next is why I think it's important to maintain a mono-compatible sound and why you shouldn't overdo these techniques. And the best way to kind of explain this is just simply by showing you an extreme example. So what I've done is I've took a demo example from the Fluid Percussion pack. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to use Ozone's Imager again to really overcook the stereo effect. So I'm going to go 100 width on this, and it's really going to push it out. And it's going to sound exciting at first, but then when we collapse to mono, I'm going to show you why it's not so great. So I'll play it, and then I'll start dialing it in. So your head, it's like it jumps out and it gets wider, it gets more exciting, especially if you've got headphones on, which sounds great. And I've done this many times, like push stuff too far out into the mix. And what happens is once you send it to your mastering engineer, you get an email back saying, have you tried bringing in the stereo width because your mix is just far too wide. So I'll show you what happens when your mastering engineer tries switching it back to mono. Just completely drops in perceived volume. The meter readings are not usually differing too much, but you just hear it just drops. And reason why it's important, because some people might think, oh well, you know, like it doesn't matter. Everyone's got headphones, everyone's got stereo speakers. What's the problem? What's the issue? Like, but the reason is like you think of like mobile phones. We've got like a mono speaker on most of them, or if you go to clubs nowadays, like a lot of them are still using mono systems. Or if you go to a festival and you stood on the left-hand side of the stage, even if it's a stereo setup, if you go and stand on one side of the stage, we're just listening to one speaker array, then you're just getting like the left channel, which is kind of like a mono signal too. And what this does is like if you're playing your own music live, or someone's DJing your music and they play a track before yours, which is like really super, like everything's kind of like mono compatible, it works in a mono situation, and then yours is super wide. What's going to happen is the life and energy is just going to get sucked out when your mix comes in, because there's such a drop in perceived volume. And also, if your sub bass is really wide and your bass frequencies are really super wide, they're not going to be as strong, as punchy as if there was made to be mono. So yeah, that's the reasons why you would why you would try to aim for a mono compatible mix. But the next example, I'm going to show you what you would do if you had a loop or a sound or something from a sample pack and it was super wide and you was like, it's unusable, I can't use this, it's too wide, it's just going to disappear when I switch to mono. You can use Ableton's utility, or you can use this plugin which I really like called Brainworx BX Control V2. And with this plugin, you've got these two knobs here which are really useful. So one of them is called the Mono Maker, and it means that when you basically what that does is as you dial it in, it makes the frequency below that reading mono. So you can take a stereo loop which has bass content, and you can make the bass content mono and the top end still leave it stereo. And the other knob is stereo width. So with this you can make things wider, or you can bring it right down and make things super mono. And what I tend to do is, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to leave that on as it is instead of just turning it off. And we're going to turn this on. And what I'm going to do is, while it's playing, I'm going to start dialing in the stereo width again. But we're going to try and find a nice balance so it's not, when we switch over, there's not a massive difference. I just do it by ear. So let's have a quick listen and I'll start to dial it in. I'd say that's quite a nice balance. There's not too much of a drop when we switch back to mono. But like I said, the other thing, the Mono Maker, we can use that as well. So the bass content and kick content stays mono. So if we dial it in, again, around 240, 260. Let's have a quick listen to this, and then we'll switch it to mono again. And the previous example with that off. So using the Brainworx BX Control V2, we can actually rein in the really wide stereo effects that was going on before and kind of make that more workable. There wouldn't be many occasions where you're trying to apply it to a full mix anyway, unless you're mastering something that has been pushed out too far. But I would recommend going back into the mix and finding out the offending channels that are making it super wide. And you'll know what they are, because when you collapse to mono, certain sounds will disappear. So if you've got super wide kind of like pads or vocals and you collapse it to mono, they're just going to disappear. And another cool thing I would recommend to do is to actually try and mix in mono. So get the project going in stereo and then start doing the mixing session in mono, because if you get a good mono mix, it's always going to sound great when you open it up to stereo. Whereas if you do it the other way, you'll run into issues that you didn't even know existed until you collapsed it to mono. So that's another little tip that I like to implement. So that's some of my favourite tips and tricks and plugins when trying to work with stereo effects and trying to make things a little bit wider in the mix. And next thing is, I would like to know if you guys got any tips or tricks that you would like to share with the rest of us, or any plugins that you use that are different to the ones I've used here that you think are really, really good and worth checking out. I would really appreciate that, and I'm sure many other people watching these videos would appreciate that too. Thank you for tuning in, and I will catch you next time.